It begins with silence. Not the silence of peace, but of discipline. You wake to the sound of boots, not yours, marching outside the barracks. The air smells of dusted straw and boiled chicory. There's no real coffee in your cup, just roasted grains meant to mimic it. Your bread is coarse, bitter, dry. And yet, you're expected to consume it all while staring at a copy of Völkischer Beobachter, the Nazi Party's official newspaper, sitting folded beside your mess tin. No one tells you to read it, but no one doesn't. On page 1, a speech by Himmler. On page 2, a cartoon of a corrupt outsider being trampled under a German boot. It's breakfast, but it's also a lesson, a daily dose of ideology mixed with margarine. According to entries from the wartime journal of Private Hans Rehfeldt, every morning in his barracks began with morale checks. Officers would pose questions. What does Germany need most right now? Why is racial purity essential for our victory? Say the wrong thing, even by accident, and your name gets written down. Not punished immediately, just noted, filed. Suspicion in this system is a currency. You are not only trained to obey, you're trained to believe, or at least perform belief convincingly. Propaganda is not just something you consume, it's something you metabolize, literally. Even food becomes a vector for control. In some barracks, margarine tins were stamped with slogans like "Strength through purity" or "The Führer feeds his people." These weren't random. They were part of a deliberate strategy called Wehrgeistpflege, the psychological grooming of the soldier's spirit. One former cook, interrogated post-war, admitted that even the kitchen had ideological protocols. Meals were designed not only for nutrition, but for mood control. Greasy stews on victorious days, bitter cabbage broth on days of mourning. The menu followed the headlines, but the strangeness doesn't end at the table. Each soldier was assigned a reading list, often including selections from Mein Kampf or racial theory pamphlets issued by the SS. Not optional. Refusing to participate in discussion groups could cost you weekend leave, or worse, earn you a new posting in the East. And if you're thinking, well, maybe they just went along with it, here's where it turns. In a training camp near Bad Tölz, instructors conducted what they called character resilience exercises. These were scenarios where soldiers were made to write loyalty statements under pressure. One drill asked, "If your own brother doubts the Reich, what do you do?" The expected answer? Report him. Anything less was marked as insufficient ideological reliability. This is how you're taught that betrayal equals virtue, not just through lectures, through your fork and knife. And the most disturbing part? Most recruits were young, 18, 19, born into the system. Their first exposure to the world was already colored by slogans, oaths, and uniforms. By the time they arrived in barracks, they weren't learning ideology, they were living in its bloodstream. Historians debate whether this conditioning counts as coercion or belief. Was the average Wehrmacht soldier a victim of propaganda or an active participant in its spread? The answer, like the morning rations, is coarse and hard to digest. But what's undeniable is this. Before you hold a rifle, before you see a battlefield, before you even speak to a superior officer, you're fed something far more potent than ammunition. You're fed obedience, and they serve it warm. You expect to fight a war with bullets, not paper. But by midday in the life of a Nazi soldier, it becomes clear. Your deadliest tool isn't the Mauser rifle on your back. It's the blank report on your desk. After breakfast, while the propaganda still lingers in your ears like static from a broken radio, you're called to fill out a Stimmungsbericht, a mood report. It sounds harmless, almost bureaucratic, but don't be fooled. You're not recording your own feelings, you're evaluating everyone else's. The Reich, always paranoid about dissent, turned every barracks into a surveillance lab. Everyone watched everyone. One wrong word, a glance too long, even a poorly timed sigh during a Hitler Youth anthem, and you might be noted. Not punished, yet, just flagged, observed, entered into a file that grows slowly until one day it swallows you whole. In Wehrmacht units across Poland in 1942, these reports became routine. But routine doesn't mean benign. According to Bundesarchiv record 4A-1121/B, a 19-year-old named Felix K. was flagged in a fellow soldier's report for saying, "This campaign feels endless." The line cost him his post. Within 3 days, he was transferred to a penal battalion tasked with clearing mines, often barefoot. And here's where the structure turns inside out. You're no longer just a soldier. You become both the informant and the target. You file reports, yes, but you also live in fear that someone's filing one about you. In fact, soldiers were encouraged, pressured, to report signs of weakness in spirit. That's the exact wording used in training manuals discovered after the war. These signs included things like showing pity for POWs, sharing rations with civilians, or expressing nostalgia for pre-war life. In one particularly chilling case, documented in the field memoirs of Sergeant Rolf G., a fellow comrade was interrogated for humming a French song while shaving. Cultural infection, they called it. You start asking yourself, what's safe to say? What's safe to feel? You learn quickly that loyalty isn't just expected, it's audited. Your conversations, your letters, even your facial expressions during speeches are evaluated. And no one tells you when you're under scrutiny. That's the genius, and the terror, of it. You only find out when the knock comes at night, or when your name disappears from the board. Perhaps the most surreal part is that your superiors are just as trapped. Officers were rated too, on their ability to maintain ideological clarity in the units they led. Commanders who failed to report enough suspicious behavior were themselves deemed suspicious. It created a chain of paranoia that reached from the barracks all the way to Berlin. It's in this atmosphere that war becomes something else entirely. Not a contest of nations or tactics, but a controlled implosion of trust. You fear your friends fear you. The enemy isn't across the field. He might be in the next bunk. By 1944, entire training facilities were repurposed as ideological testing grounds. At the Elsenborn camp, soldiers underwent weekly evaluations on racial theory and loyalty tenets. Miss one question? Lose a stripe. Give the wrong answer twice? Lose your post. In some extreme cases, deportation to re-education units occurred, many in the Eastern Front, where survival rates were abysmal. There's a reason so many Wehrmacht soldiers came home not only traumatized by the battlefield, but by each other. They weren't just fighting the Allies, they were surviving their own side. So by the end of your second hour, you haven't touched your weapon, but you've written down 2 comrades' names, lied twice on your form, and caught your reflection in a broken mirror, wondering if you still recognize the person inside. And as the officer collects your report, you can't help but think, in this army, your signature might carry more weight than a bullet, because in Nazi Germany, it's not what you do on the battlefield that gets you killed. It's what you say at lunch. By late afternoon, the sun casts long shadows across the compound, but there's no warmth, only the kind of chill that doesn't come from weather, but from what's about to happen. You're called to assemble in the square, not for inspection, not for training, for a demonstration, a message carved into flesh. The accused stands alone, hands bound, eyes unfocused. His name? You're not told. His crime? Only whispered guesses. He tried to hide a letter. He gave bread to a Russian girl. He asked why we're really here. No one knows for sure, and that's the point. The ambiguity makes everyone afraid. In October 1942, at a field garrison near Smolensk, records confirm the public execution of a corporal named Heinrich B., age 24. His offense: unauthorized possession of civilian photos. He had kept a picture of a Jewish family he found in a burned-out house. He said they reminded him of his neighbors. The image alone was enough to brand him a sympathizer. His name was erased from all official lists within 72 hours, but his execution was scheduled for sunset. This was no battlefield justice, no trial by jury. It was a ritual. An officer reads a brief decree, no emotion, no appeal, and then, without fanfare, the shot. A single crack splits the air, and the soldier drops. No one moves, no one cries. You're not allowed to look away. In fact, looking away could mark you as emotionally compromised. And afterward, you march back to dinner. You eat, you clean your boots, you fold your uniform for the next day. But something changes in the air. That night, in the bunks, no one talks. You pretend to sleep while staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster. You replay the sound in your mind, not just the gunshot, but the silence after. The way the officer stepped over the body like it was nothing. The way the birds didn't sing afterward. And the worst part? You start thinking, what would they say if it had been me? Because now you know how fast it can happen. One moment you're one of them. The next, you're the example. Historical documents from the Wehrmacht Justice Division confirm that over 15,000 soldiers were executed by their own side between 1939 and 1945. Some for desertion, others for defeatist talk, many for infractions that, in any sane world, wouldn't merit a reprimand. But in this system, mercy was considered weakness. There's something deeply unnatural about watching a man die in front of you and learning to nod. And it creates a deeper transformation. You stop thinking about what's right or wrong. You think only about what's safe. You don't question why the sunset ceremony always ends in blood. You just hope your name isn't next. Some historians argue these acts were meant to preserve order in chaos. That discipline, even cruel, was necessary in wartime. But others point to something darker. A state that used fear not just as a tool, but as a philosophy, where executions weren't just punishments, they were performances, theater, to remind everyone that even loyalty has an expiration date. So when the sun dips below the tree line and the officer says, "Dismissed," you don't exhale in relief. You just breathe in the dread of tomorrow. Because here, in the world you now inhabit, no one dies for what they did. They die for what someone thought they might do. And that's what keeps you up at night. The darkness doesn't feel like rest. It feels like confinement. When lights out is called, you don't sigh in relief. You lie still, eyes wide open, waiting for your own thoughts to betray you. In the dim barracks, under wool blankets that never quite warm, the real war begins, not against an enemy, but against your own mind. You listen, every creak, every breath. You wonder if the man 2 bunks down is really asleep. You remember he looked away during the execution. Did anyone else see? Did you see too much? This isn't paranoia, it's policy. At Camp Kronsberg near Hanover in late 1944, soldiers were instructed to report ideological drift, even at night. According to an internal training memo recovered in the post-war tribunals, night patrols weren't just to prevent desertion, they were meant to detect philosophical deviations. One soldier, Udo M., was detained after muttering something in his sleep that undermined Aryan triumph. That exact phrase appears in his file. So yes, even your dreams weren't private. Sleep deprivation was never officially mandated, but it didn't need to be. The system kept you awake by design. Endless drills, surprise inspections, sudden relocations, and behind it all, the gnawing fear that everything you do, everything you don't do, everything you think or fail to think can be used against you. One Wehrmacht medic, Kurt V., later testified that entire units began showing signs of chronic insomnia, hallucinations, and psychosomatic tremors, not from combat, but from ideological vigilance fatigue. Their bodies weren't breaking under fire, they were breaking under surveillance. And here's where it gets even stranger. Some officers encouraged late-night confessionals, small, closed-door meetings where soldiers were urged to clear their conscience about unpatriotic thoughts. What began as psychological manipulation quickly turned into a self-policing culture of guilt. If you didn't confess something, anything, it was taken as proof you were hiding worse. It was a system without exits. If you doubted, you were a traitor. If you stayed silent, you were suspicious. If you complied too eagerly, you might be faking it. And so, at night, in the stillness, the walls close in, not literally, but ideologically. You're not imprisoned by bars. You're imprisoned by the belief that any moment, a slip could end your life. Remember the man who was executed at sunset? His bunk wasn't reassigned for days, not for logistical reasons, but to remind everyone that his ghost, his mistake, still lived there, a cautionary shadow. Some scholars now argue that this psychological architecture was as central to Nazi military power as tanks and planes. That terror wasn't just a byproduct, it was infrastructure, engineered, distributed, maintained. And when morning comes, you rise again, not refreshed, not rested, but rehearsed. You fold your blanket with military precision. You recite the morning loyalty phrase. You drink your burnt chicory coffee and pretend it's real. And as you walk past the empty bunk, you tell yourself something that no longer feels like a lie. I'm still alive. But deep down, you know that in this army, the war doesn't wait for a battlefield. It waits for you in your sleep.